Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
Hey y'all, it's Tony Rose Deanna, they them pronouns, a designated hype person here at MCP, and I am joined today by an elementary school teacher, actually a Montessori school teacher at Central Elementary in Montana, Tony Napoletano. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's so exciting to be in this space with you, and thank you so much for saying yes to the podcast. Tamiko spoke really highly of you, and I love looking at your bio and seeing that you love hiking and knitting and gluten-free baking. Is that right?
Yeah, the joy of genes have finally taken over. My mom has celiac, and they're starting to affect me now that I'm getting older. So I'm learning because I have to.
Yeah, I hear that. That's so fascinating, and I am excited for you to adjust and to continue taking care of your health. And so, before we get started, what is bringing you joy currently?
I guess on that note, I actually have a couple of students in my class that are unable to eat gluten as well. One has celiac and others have a couple intolerances. So it's been really fun to get to talk to them about something that in general, they don't really get to talk to. They just feel like they're left out. So it's kind of got to flip the script for them sometimes because they get something and maybe the other people realize that, oh, this is what it's like.
Yeah, and that's always so interesting to see representation, right? And it's also that sense of belongingness too, of like, oh, this is something that I'm going through, and now I don't have to explain or over-explain. Like someone who has the same thing I do can understand, and we can just have conversations about it and learn from each other and how to adjust, how to shift, how to like make all the moves, right? So that is really, really great that y'all are having those conversations. Okay. So, Tony, you and I, twinsies, by the way, with the names, love it. Tamika was talking about your experience in Montessori schools. And so for listeners who may not know much about Montessori, how do you define it? Like, what makes it different than a non-Montessori school?
Sure. So Maria Montessori is an Italian doctor, well, was. She was one of the first doctors actually in Italy in the early 1900s. And when she was working with children with disabilities, she was noticing some things. And because of her science background, she was making observations. And then she would start making materials for those kids, which ended up being really helpful for them because they have manipulatives, which we all now know is really important for kids. She's one of the first people to make those observations and realize that those are good tools for kids. And then from there, she was able to start her own program. And at one point, Italy actually, before World War II, was going to completely integrate into the Montessori ideals. Then World War II happened, and she ended up exiled in India for a fair amount of time due to the fact that her and Mussolini didn't agree, which is actually her chance to write a lot of her peace curriculum that she has. And then through the 50s and 60s, it started becoming popular in the States. And then after it became more popular in the States, they formed the American Montessori Society. And from there, it just kind of exploded in a lot of different spots. I actually didn't know about it until I was volunteering for a school while I was working to get my graduate degree. And they just asked me if I wanted to it was in a public school. And they just asked me if I wanted to help out in a Montessori classroom. And I said yes. And I really like the idea that the kids get to make many more of their own choices in the classroom, which is really similar to how modern classroom works.
And this is so fascinating too, Tony. Oh man, I'm using that word a lot because I don't know much about Montessori schools. I've heard just great things about Montessori schools, but I don't have experience in those types of schools at all. And so going through that history lesson, thank you so much for teaching me and expanding my brain because I had no idea about the history of Montessori. And so I have a follow-up question of like, okay, you said like in the 50s and the 60s it kind of got popular in the States. How did that come along? Like, because it was in Italy. Italy was thinking about it and then they got distracted, which happens to all like so many countries, right? When it comes to education reform, reforming education. So, how did it get to the US? And do you know? I'm just curious, out of curiosity.
Maria Montessori would tour the world, presenting her findings, and some folks. I'm going to be honest, without the books, I can't think of the names right off the top of my head. But some folks really enjoyed her conversations, and they started talking to her more and more, and that's what brought it into the States. Just a few folks that were particularly engaged in the conversations. I guess kind of similarly now when things like Modern Classroom Project happens and people see that it's a good idea, they want to make it possible for more people.
And I love that alignment too. Thank you, Tony, for keeping me focused too. I do love the fact that you shared you were asked to volunteer and you had no idea what Montessori was about. And so you just kind of went in there and now you're teaching, right? And so what first drew you to Montessori education as you were volunteering? And then how has that understanding of that method evolved through hands-on classroom experience?
Sure. I think the biggest part is the multi-age component to Montessori. So in a traditional Montessori classroom, you have a lower and an upper Montessori classroom. The lower is the first, second, and third. And then traditionally it's 4, 5, 6 for the upper. In our district, sixth grade goes to middle school. So I have fourth and fifth graders in my upper Montessori classroom. And I really like the idea that having a group of kids at different ages can really benefit the fact that, say, one of my fourths is struggling, but I'm working on a small group lesson. One of those fifths can then come in and help out that fourth because they just had that work just last year. And then on the flip side of that, I have a couple of fifth graders who, because we have a good community, can work on some things that are maybe technically in a public school a fourth grade standard, but they can still work with those fourth graders to get that more grounded understanding of that concept.
Oh, it's kind of that spiral review kind of deal, right? It's like an opportunity for them to continue to review their skills, to refine their skills. So they're not being penalized for practicing those fourth grade skills if they're in fifth grade. If anything, it's just like, hey, this is a way for us to look at the skills again to make sure that we continue using the skills that we're learning. You know, the multi-age it's pretty scary to me because I've never taught at a multi-age classroom. I've always taught just sixth graders, and then I would have like ninth graders on the side, but never really together. And so this concept for me is a little scary because all I could think about was like, oh man, there's a lot of personalization that's going to happen. There's a lot of needs that's happening. You know, 9 years old is a lot different than 10 years old, which is really wild. And I'm even thinking about middle school too, right? Sixth graders, so different than seventh graders, so different than eighth graders. And so, you know, you had voice that you teach fourth and fifth grade at the same time. So walk me through your schedule, like planning, balance, communication. How many students do you have? How do you determine which curriculum to use, standards, testing, all of that good stuff? And then we'll jump into modern classroom because I'm really curious how you use both methods, right? You have MCP and then the Montessori method as well.
Sure. One of the other components of a Montessori classroom is a personalized work plan. So every kid at the beginning of the week gets a work plan with the different areas that they need to work on, and then their own independent components that they want to make sure they get to. So, for example, today I had some students working on human body systems. I had some students working on Revolutionary War. They all had to work on math. That's a requirement daily, but they're all doing different math activities. And either from me giving them their lessons or from them knowing that with our card works. So our card works are basically like a lesson in Eureka Math. With their card works, they know how to progress through those math activities. And then we're currently working on interviews. So the kids are now at the final draft stage. And so in the classroom, you might come in and so I have 25 kids this year. Because it's a multi-age classroom, we cap in Montana state. Every state does things a little differently, but in the state of Montana, for a multi-age classroom, it's 24. I was given permission to have a 25th this year because they're a long-standing central Montessori family, and we didn't want to lose them. But when you come in, they have their time isn't like when I was a middle school teacher and I would be teaching math. Everybody's doing math at the same time. Here, we classify them as work periods. Ideally, they're 3 hours, but with our schedule, they're a little shorter. They're more like 2. And then they get to use their work plan to make it through their daily work and then also the bigger projects that they're working on throughout the time period. So you're right. It is a lot of planning ahead and making sure that everybody's staying on task, but it also allows me to be less robotic, which I really appreciate.
It's that piece of being less robotic, right? And I think too, when you said there are work periods and it's typically 3 hours, and then you're like, well, based on our schedule, it's 2 hours. 2 hours is still a long time for fourth and fifth graders, right? How do you get them to stay engaged the entire time? And in my head, I'm like, wow, this is really perfect for self-pacing. What you're doing is exactly self-pacing, right? Like students have this personalized work plan. They work on it on their own time during their work period, but they all know what the expectations are. How do you keep them engaged? Because I know and I've heard from people as well, like, oh, self-pacing or work periods, as you would call it, that's too long. My students are too young for that, or they're in elementary school. They can't do that. What are your thoughts on that?
Though it is a long work period, most of the kids, I don't really have to monitor all that much. There are some that, you and I are both kids. I will admit to not maybe doing all my work in fifth grade. Some of those kids that they get a little extra reminders every once in a while. I have some kids that are on more direct schedules, so they know at this time they're doing this work or at this time they're doing this work. And one of the things that Maria Montessori observed was, yes, kids should be independent, but independence is a lot different than just doing whatever you want. And if you're not actually capable of showing the responsibility that is required to be independent, then we have to take some of that independence away. So I have a few kids that are doing self-monitoring checks right now, for example, just to keep them accountable for their own work. There's a couple of kids that I actually have a para-educator that comes in for a half an hour and they work with them so that they have a little more one-on-one time. So it all kind of depends on the kid. But in general, it doesn't tend to be too much of a problem. If we actually have a meeting tomorrow about how our recesses are set up this year, and I don't know that I will probably be the minority in this, but if it was up to me, we would have a longer recess and less of them so that we could have that more drawn out time. There's also a thing that Dr. Montessori observed, which was false fatigue. And that's when a kid's kind of tired of doing the work, so they kind of act like they can't do it, or they kind of act this way or that way. And it's really hard to do, but if you leave them and everybody else is doing their work, they'll get back to it. And that's something that is, especially for my mind, is incredibly difficult to do. And I'm sure a lot of teachers' minds, but we have 3 pods in Helena for Montessori. So there's 2 lower Montessori and 1 upper in 3 different schools here. And one of our lower Montessori teachers is very adamant about that. So she'll bring it up at our meetings all the time. And so I've been trying to do a better job of accepting that you're going to take a break at some point in that 2 hours. And that's okay, as long as you're not disturbing other kids from getting their work done.
Oh, and this is such a great reminder too, as human beings, right? Like you said, you and I were both students. You and I probably did not complete all of our work in fourth and fifth grade, in any of the grades, honestly, because we were trying to figure out what was the most important or what did I care about. And so, understanding that human beings, regardless of the age, need breaks. You are expanding my brain because, again, or rather, yes, you're expanding it. And you're also reminding me, and probably your listeners too, about this independence piece, right? We're always talking about how we want self directed learners. Yes, and, right? We want that. And if they are not able to do it, then we have to take some of that back so that students can have that gradual release and not just like, here's all of the independence and you have no idea how to do it. And a lot of the things that you're saying, again, really aligns with what we're doing with self-pacing, right? There's that gradual release, there's that modeling piece. There's also this piece of like, no, you got to really figure it out yourself. The word false, or the term that you said, false fatigue, kind of reminds me of learned helplessness too, right? This is a conversation that I've had with multiple teachers about learned helplessness, about how our students just know we're going to give them the answer anyway, so they're not going to try. And it's not the same as false fatigue, but I can see that the students will be like, you know what, I'm actually kind of tired of this. I don't want to do this right now. And as teachers, we want to keep them on task and engaged. And we do that in a way sometimes where we're kind of harming the learning piece, right? Or like pausing the learning piece because we just give the students the answer so that they can continue engaging with it, as opposed to allowing the students the space to take a break from that learning, because 2 hours is a long time. Like you said, I know for me, I can't focus for 2 hours straight if I don't take my Adderall. So these are really great points. Thank you, Tony, for this. The great reminders and also just expanding my brain. So let's talk about MCP, right? You've mentioned MCP before, and I kind of wanted to give our listeners some background information about Montessori, how you got into it. Now let's talk about how these two can work together. And we've kind of talked about the self-pacing piece as well, but how has MCP supported you in your teaching and learning practice?
I think one of the biggest parts that has helped me is given me the permission to be okay with kids being at different levels. Because in a Montessori classroom, that's just how it is. But I also work in a public school. And so sometimes that can be really difficult because I'm frantically thinking, oh man, scope and sequence. We got to be here. We got to be here. There's this coming up or that coming up. And with the self-pacing, the kids, yes, there are some hard deadlines, but they get a chance to work at their own pace. And that works both ways. So I have one student that we use Eureka Math at our district. And one of the nice things about the Modern Classroom project is the video component of it allows kids, if I'm giving a face-to-face lesson with somebody on one thing and another kid is ready to move on, and I feel confident that they can do that, then there's a video available that they can go and watch that lesson and not have to wait for whatever amount of time it is until I can finally get to them. I would say that's one of the biggest parts of the Modern Classroom that I've been able to take advantage of. The other part is making sure. So like I said already, we have work plans, and that's really similar to their the monitoring and the self-pacing with Modern Classroom. So an awful lot of what we're doing, and then the fact that we use Eureka Math for our district, and that's what everything's based on for Modern Classroom, that runs parallel with almost everything that we have as far as Montessori materials. I think the only difference in 90% of the materials is the color. For whatever reason, I honestly don't know. Maria Montessori was adamant that when you're working with units, you're working with green. When you're working with tens, you're working with blue. And when you're working with hundreds, you're working with red. And some of the Eureka math materials, they have units, tens and hundreds, but they might be a different color. But it's still the same principles that are being taught. So most of what it is kind of just reaffirmation that what I'm doing is best practice.
And I'm sure that feels really good to know that, like, okay, I am doing the best that I can. I am showing up for my students the best way that I can. And I am helping students really achieve what they need to be successful in, right? And or their goals anyway. So this is again really, really interesting. Thank you, Tony, for just sharing that the model gave you permission. And this is something that I always talk about with teachers that I work with, and even our listeners and our guests too, is just that permission. Sometimes as educators, we forget that we have quote unquote free will to do what we think is best for our students intentionally, right? With a lot of intention behind it, of course. And I think sometimes, and so I think sometimes hearing that permission or hearing somebody say something that you could try, you're like, oh yeah, I could do that. You're absolutely right. I forgot about that. Let me do that. And so again, like you said, public schools, you have scope and sequence, you have deadlines, you have testing. I'm sure you have all of these things. So there's pressure for you to perform in a way that adds a lot of stress to you and your students, I'm sure. And so I love that you said, you know what, the video lessons are really helpful. The personalized work plans that we talked about really aligns with the self-monitoring and the self-pacing piece as well. And then, of course, just that executive functioning skills that our students need to be successful outside of school, right? Outside of the classrooms. And so I also really love that you shouted out Eureka Math and the curriculum derivatives that we're doing here at MCP. And so that's really cool as well. And that's something that I'm also learning as we go. And so, okay, can you share some student insights from your classroom? Anything that you've heard them say or reflect or write about how the model is going for them?
Yeah, I would say, so as much as I appreciate those videos, I've also had kids tell me that they're not learning that way. And so I also, as helpful as it is, and again, this goes back to everybody learns their own way. There are some kids that the video is the way they want to do it. Like they would actually prefer to do it that way because they get it and then they can just move on and they like to just check it off. Whereas I've had some other kids tell me, that video, whether it's me or the one that Modern Classrooms provided, it's just not the same. And so most of the time, they've done a really good job of advocating for themselves of, hey, this isn't working for me. This really does work for me. And so let's make sure that that's what's happening. I would say that's probably the biggest insight they've given me. I mean, again, it sounds like you were working with sixth graders. This age, they are very honest and they do not have filters. So I very much will know if something's working or not. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing. The other part of it is letting them have the chance to say this is easy, but also letting them realize the importance of the fundamentals of math at this grade level and being able to have that conversation so that, maybe somebody told you that multiplying means that you multiply the numerators and then you multiply the denominators, but we have a whole bunch of works that are going to show you why that is. And sometimes that can be a little tricky. And so one of the things that I like about my class is their ability to say what they have to say, but also hear the other side of it. And they may not love the outcome, but they understand it.
And these are great life skills that you're teaching them, Tony. And so I really, really appreciate you for doing this, for creating a space where students are brave enough to share their insights like that, of being like, hey, you know what? I don't like learning this way. And I need it to be like this, right? And like you said, that's what we want our students to become, our advocates for their own learning, right? Because you have 25 students, I know sometimes for me, I tell my students all the time, hey, there's 25 of y'all, there's one of me. As much as I would love to know every single need, I need you to also voice and advocate for yourself. If I'm doing something that is not working, please let me know so that we can switch it, so that we can personalize it, so that it is something that works for you and your brain. And so I love this piece of you celebrating the fact that your students are naming, hey, the videos are great. Some students love it. Some students don't love it. But now you actually have the capacity to create those personalized learning spaces for your students, right? And so I really love that you're receptive, that you're ready to adjust, you're ready to shift, you're ready to really give the students that learning experience that they're craving, because now they're saying it, right? And I also kudos to you for having a math space where students are having discourse and hearing other people's perspectives of how they did that problem. How did they solve that problem? What was the solution? So it seems like there's a lot of discourse that's happening in your 4th and 5th grade classrooms. And that's so dope. I love that so much. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so before we go, because I know that you and I had rescheduled multiple times and I want to be respectful of your time, I am really, really grateful for you, again, expanding my brain on Montessori and how you're utilizing MCP with Montessori method. Is there anything else that you want to add on before we hop off?
I think the biggest thing is going back to just being allowed to give kids more independence, and how important it is for kids to realize that there are responsibilities that come with independence, and using the modern classroom model is really allowing that to happen more. And then on top of that, just the collaboration that's able to happen. And it can happen both ways. Like it can always happen on the positive side, but there's sometimes that it happens on the negative side, which is just as good. And I shouldn't say negative like it was bad. Negative like two kids absolutely despise whatever lesson they're working on. But because they absolutely despise it together, they're like, all right, well, let's just get this done and figure it out. And then we can move on to the next thing. And most of the time they don't get to do that. In like a more standard classroom, they would just go through the drudgery and whatnot. And this allows them to learn like, hey, not everything is perfect, but we don't have to spend a ton of time on this, and we don't have to dwell on it. We can just do what we need to get done and then learn from it and move to the next thing. And I really appreciate that.
And I'm sure your students appreciate that as well, right? And that just, oh my gosh, thank you. Because I've also been curious about how Montessori and MCP could work together. And it seems like they both enhance each other, which I absolutely love. So again, Tony, thank you for your time. Thank you for your experiences and your expertise. And I just really, really appreciate all of that. So thank you again for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the chance. This is my first podcast, so it's been kind of interesting to learn technology. I will hopefully have the camera fixed next time.
Yes, and we'll definitely have it next time because I want to hear the updates and all of that good stuff. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Listeners, remember you can always email us at podcast@modernclassrooms.org. And you can find the links to topics and tools we discussed, as well as more info on this week's announcements and events, in the show notes for this episode at podcast.modernclassrooms.org. We'll have this episode's recap and transcript uploaded to the Modern Classrooms blog on Friday, so be sure to check there or check back in the show notes for this episode if you'd like to access those. And if you enjoy our podcast and it's been helpful in supporting you to create a blended, self-paced, mastery-based learning environment, we would love if you could leave a review. that does help other folks find our podcast. And of course, you can always learn the essentials of our model if you want to go beyond the podcast through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. And you can follow us on social media at modernclassproj. That's PROJ. We are so appreciative of all the hard work you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.